beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. A new start to Sunday.
I'm ready. Are you?
Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
The most significant day of this conflict.
They keep telling us that they want aid.
And this is what's left of it.
Tanks, heavy vehicle.
Why only in America?
People want their country to work.
Just want a job in a normal life.
Why are these homes empty?
I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first. Free wherever you get your news. It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10, live from the Lebanese capital, Beirut. Our top story. We won't stop. Israel warns its attacks on Hezbollah will continue as it kills a senior militant commander in an airstrike. Hezbollah too maintains its attacks, firing more rockets and drones into northern Israel from across the border. Thousands of people continue to flee the fighting as the conflict intensifies. But President Biden insists a diplomatic solution is still possible.
Also ahead on Sky News at 10, Sir Keir Starmer attempts to strike an upbeat tone at the Labour conference, pledging to rebuild Britain. Sky News investigates the brand new luxury British cars entering Russia despite sanctions. And we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages. That's in our press preview from 10:30 right through to midnight.
Good evening from Beirut. I'm Yalda Hakim. Israel has warned that it will continue to strike against the Lebanese militant group Hezbollah as the conflict between the two sides intensifies. Today, Israel hit a number of targets in this city, claiming to have killed a senior Hezbollah commander. And further south, Israel and Hezbollah again exchange fire across the border, fueling fears that time is running out to find a peaceful resolution to this conflict. Well, NASA data on fires in the region shows the scale of Israel's airstrikes, which the IDF says have targeted missile launchers and weapons storage facilities. Israel has again urged people in the Bekaa Valley to leave the region, dropping leaflets from planes earlier today. Tens of thousands of people have now fled the fighting along the border, with traffic jams along major roads towards the north. In a moment, we will hear from our Middle East correspondent, Alistair Bunkle, in northern Israel on the impact there of Hezbollah's attacks. But first, our special correspondent, Alex Crawford, is in the southern Lebanese city of Tyre and reports now on how Lebanon is now a country in crisis.
Another bloody day in Lebanon. The Israeli airstrikes just keep on coming. 2 more strikes in Lebanon's capital, the 3rd time in 5 days that Beirut's been hit. Shredded bodies too graphic to show were blown onto car roofs. The Israeli forces said they targeted the head of Hezbollah's missiles and rockets unit, Mohammed Kabisi, and other commanders, although this wasn't immediately confirmed by the militants. This area is the heartland of Hezbollah in the capital, but it's a crowded population hub too. South of the country got pounded again. They've been non-stop.
Oh, there's another one.
We witnessed the airstrikes throughout the day. It's been relentless. The Israeli force promised to accelerate their offensive, and they're holding good on that vow. The constant bombardment means the mass movement of people has been going on for more than 30 hours now. The desperate rush to get out of the line of fire means the humanitarian crisis here is growing and growing. My family have no money. We've got nothing, Fatima told us. How are we going to survive? We've lost everything. Like many here, her home was bombed and people have been scrambling to get basic supplies. The emergency workers are overwhelmed, struggling to cope with scarce resources and a sudden spike in the numbers who've been forced out of their homes, on top of those who fled over the past year of cross-border exchanges.
Half of the IDP's people, they slept in the garden, on the beach, without any tent, any cover, any blanket, in the streets and in their cars. For that's it, it's a disaster. And you see, and when you see the eyes of the babies and the woman, it's really.
The Israeli forces hit east of the country too, the Bekaa Valley. They say they're targeting Hezbollah weapons stores and fighters hiding in residential areas. But amongst the dead in the Bekaa Valley was a young mother who worked for UNHCR. She and her young son were killed when an airstrike hit their home. Her husband and second child survived but are critical. The refugee agency said it was outraged and saddened at the killing. The emergency centres are full of families. This man told us his was the only home in his village left standing and insisted his area was not involved in the fighting.
That's not true. Not a single target was on a military position. They're only hitting civilians. We don't have military operations in our village.
It's been a terrifying few days for Lebanon and one of the nation's worst weeks in nearly a year, with a titanic wave of people moving out of the south and still moving. We were among the huge displacement and saw the constant airstrikes either side of the main coastal highway as people tried to flee. The astonishing huge movement of the Lebanese population from the south comes on the back of nearly a year of Israel saying it wants to create a buffer zone so Hezbollah cannot fire into its northern communities. Hezbollah's linked its attacks on Israel since last October to a Gaza ceasefire, and with the Israeli forces vowing to increase their onslaught on the militants, Lebanon looks set for a very rough period ahead. Alex Crawford, Sky News, in Tyre, southern Lebanon.
Well, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has appealed to the people of Lebanon to reject Hezbollah, warning them to free themselves for their own good. His comments came after Hezbollah maintained its bombardment of targets inside Israel during the day. 2 Palestinian civilians died in Tamra when it was struck by a missile, and Hezbollah says it targeted the Atlit naval base, Megiddo airfield, Eliakim camp, and an explosives factory in Zichron, more than 60 kilometers into Israel. Israel has already evacuated an area over 2 miles from the border with Lebanon and says its key war aim is to return more than 80,000 displaced people to their homes. Many of those people are still living in displacement centres, including in the northern city of Haifa, from where our Middle East correspondent Alistair Bunkle reports.
Hezbollah is continuing to fire missiles into northern Israel. Not as many as it probably could, but still defying Israeli strikes on its territory. One missile hit a supermarket in an Arab-Israeli town. Nobody was hurt.
I heard the sirens from my house, and suddenly they said that Jad Market, it's this supermarket which belongs to a friend of mine, had been hit. I came here immediately to see what had happened. And then I saw this hole behind me that opened up inside a wall. And from down there, there's a hole in the ground. That's as a result of the shockwave of the rocket or its warhead.
Benjamin Netanyahu has said Israel won't back down.
We will continue to hit Hezbollah. And I say to the people of Lebanon, our war is not with you. Our war is with Hezbollah. Nasrallah is leading you to the brink of the abyss. I told you yesterday to evacuate the houses where he put a missile in the living room and a rocket in the garage. The one who has a missile in his living room and a rocket in his garage will not have a home. But I tell you another thing. He causes your country to be in danger. Free yourself from the grip of Hezbollah.
An Israeli reserve soldier was injured in another attack. He was brought to hospital in Haifa, conscious and talking. 3 floors below ground is the fortified hospital that they built in an underground car park after the last Lebanon war in 2006. It is now up and running as the situation worsens here in the north.
We are prepared. We have a lot of operating rooms, and our staff is very well trained for taking care of trauma patients. We are a high-level trauma center, one of the bigger, I think the biggest in Israel, of course in the north. So we are very well prepared.
In case of emergency, we'll say what's going on.
The operations room monitors video feeds from around the region as air raid sirens warn of incoming missiles. In parking bays, the patients have little privacy, but do have the security of a complex that is bomb-proof and can be sealed to protect against chemical and biological attacks.
So they've moved a lot of the patients that were above ground, below ground for safety, and also a lot of patients that were in hospitals around the region, around northern Israel. And just look how busy it is. This is one road that runs through what was the underground car park, now full of beds, patients, doctors, nurses, and they say they're only operating at half capacity. Their worst case scenario is missiles hitting Haifa every 4 to 5 minutes.
This underground hospital is itself a symbol of the inevitable. It was built after one war with Hezbollah, with the certainty that one day another would break out. That day has now come. Alistair Bunkle, Sky News in Haifa.
Well, the US President Joe Biden has insisted that a diplomatic solution to the conflict in the Middle East is still possible. In his final address to the United Nations as president, Mr. Biden warned that a full-scale war is in no one's interests. The United States has made it clear that it believes the path to peace must see all sides respecting UN Security Council Resolution 1701. Now, that resolution ended a month-long war between Israel and Hezbollah in 2006, but both sides accused the other of not abiding by it. It called for the government of Lebanon to have full control over the country and reiterated previous calls to disband and disarm all militias in Lebanon. But Hezbollah has only grown in strength. The resolution specifically calls for Hezbollah and other armed groups in Lebanon to withdraw south of the Litani River, which flows around 18 miles north of the border this too has not happened. And it gives strong support to Lebanon's territorial integrity, something Lebanon accuses Israel of regularly violating, with over 10,000 UN troops deployed to patrol a demarcation blue line along the disputed border. So, is President Biden right? Is a diplomatic solution still possible? Our international affairs editor Dominic Waghorn reports from the UN in New York.
It was not the last speech Joe Biden would have wanted to give at the UN. No high note to end on as he arrived in New York, just swirling crises threatening his legacy overseas. Most of all, conflict escalating by the minute in the Middle East.
Full-scale war is not in anyone's interest. Even if the situation has escalated, a diplomatic solution is still possible.
With wars in Ukraine, Sudan, Gaza and now Lebanon raging, the optimistic note Joe Biden tried to strike may to many sound discordant.
Every age faces its challenges. I saw it as a young man. I see it today. But we are stronger than we think. We're stronger together than alone. And what the people call impossible is just an illusion.
Are you concerned about Lebanon?
Sorry, got to keep going.
How worried should we be about Lebanon? Any message today? Well, how worried should we be, sir, about Lebanon?
How concerned are you about Lebanon and Israel?
It is the crisis few seem to want to make worse by talking about here. We're told intense diplomacy is underway, but there is little evidence of that. Iran's president urged the world to intervene and restrain Israel.
It is imperative that the international community should immediately stop the violence and bring about a permanent ceasefire in Gaza and bring an end to the desperate barbarism of Israel in Lebanon before it engulfs the region and the world. Israel has been defeated in Gaza, and no amount of barbaric violence can restore its myth of invincibility.
Increasingly isolated here, Israel's ambassador insists his country is acting in self-defense.
We are determined to protect the civilians of Israel. We prefer a diplomatic solution. If it's not working, we are using other methods to show to the other side that we mean business.
There is little doubt that world leaders gathered here are deeply worried about events in the Middle East, but there's less sign of the kind of diplomatic intervention required to defuse it. While events in the region are moving quickly, the wheels of diplomacy here are grinding more slowly. Divided and dysfunctional, the UN is not the place it used to be to end conflicts. The fear is events in the region are moving far quicker than efforts to contain them. Dominic Waghorn, Sky News, New York.
Let's bring in our special correspondent, Alex Crawford, who joins me from southern Lebanon. And Alex, if you were to listen to the words of the leaders at the UN General Assembly, you would think there was no appetite for war, but it's a very different situation here on the ground.
It definitely is. I mean, there is a constant sound of Israeli jets over southern Lebanon here where we are. We've heard bombardments just down south from where we are within the past hour. There are constant salvos of Hezbollah rockets going over into Israel. There's a massive displacement, tens of thousands of people out of southern Lebanon, and we know that there have been Israeli airstrikes not just in the south, not just in the capital, the third time in 5 days, but also in the east, in the Bekaa Valley. The Lebanese government is pulling its hair out because they feel they've been in some ways hijacked by Hezbollah, but the anger is very much directed against Israel. They've spent the best part of a year trying to persuade Hezbollah to show restraint, trying to get everything to calm down, and they feel that's been upended over the last 2 days, with the Israeli Prime Minister saying that he's not waging a war against the Lebanese people, he's only waging a war against Hezbollah. But to the people here on the ground here, the Lebanese people who are feeling terrorized, who are fleeing in their tens of thousands, who are tonight sleeping rough somewhere or in shelters, and the high number of deaths, nearly 600 deaths just over the last 2 days, as well as the wounded. The Lebanese government's been saying there have been attacks on hospitals. The UNHCR says 2 of their workers have been killed in Tyre and in the Bekaa Valley. So it doesn't feel like Israel is not waging war on Lebanon right now. That is definitely how the Lebanese people are feeling, and they're at wit's end right now, Yalda.
Yeah, very much so. Alex, thank you so much for all of your reporting there from southern Lebanon. Well, as Alex was saying, a devastating situation with the death toll rising and tens of thousands of people displaced trying to move away from the violence. We will be continuing to follow all the developments here on the ground. We'll also have a special coverage of the situation here tomorrow at 2 p.m. So do join us for that. But for now, Anna, back to you in the studio.
Yalda, thank you. Sir Keir Starmer has attempted to get the government back on the front foot at Labour's annual conference today, promising light at the end of the tunnel. He insisted that changing Britain had begun, but said it was a long-term project and he had never pretended otherwise. So after weeks of damaging headlines about freebies and disquiet about cuts to winter fuel payments, was it enough to win over the party faithful and the country? Our political editor, Beth Rigby, has this report from Liverpool.
Keir Starmer, Prime Minister and leader of the Labour Party.
This the welcome. Keir Starmer, the first Labour Prime Minister in 15 years to address Labour conference. Warmth in the room for a politician who's now getting a much cooler reception beyond.
Thank you.
Here to show his first 80 days of leadership has been a success.
Make no mistake. The work of change has begun. Planning reformed. Doctors back in theatre. New solar projects. The Renters Reform Bill, stopping no-fault evictions. And the Railway Services Bill, bringing railways back into public ownership. And we're only just getting started.
Change begins the mantra, but not much new on the missions. A massive majority, but modest announcements on veterans' access to housing and a permanent home for GB Energy in Aberdeen.
I think this guy's obviously got a pass from the 2019 conference.
The now semi-regular protest moment handled deftly. But this blunder on escalating tensions in the Middle East, a horrible gaffe.
I call again for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza, the return of the sausages, the hostages.
After weeks of warning about the pain to come, the PM trying to land a message about the prize.
And the truth is that if we take tough, long-term decisions now, if we stick to the driving purpose behind everything we do, then that light at the end of this tunnel, that Britain that belongs to you, we get there much more quickly.
But Starmer stumbling already, caught in a row around corporate hospitality and clothing freebies, undermining his promise to do things differently.
We must build a new Britain, built from that age-old spirit of creativity and enterprise, the pride and ambition of working people, that when matched by a government of service, a decisive government, a government prepared to use its powers for justice, opportunity and equal respect, can deliver a Britain that belongs to you. A Britain that belongs to you because politics sees public service as a privilege, not privilege as an entitlement to public service. Thank you, conference. Thank you.
That should have felt like a victory lap, and of course the hall is on his side. But in truth, the hope, the hunger of last year's conference is now giving way to the hard reality of governing. There has been criticism around some of you two have been involved in it, about this being a government of self-service and all the freebie stuff. What do you say to that?
Well, hopefully, by the announcements that the Prime Minister made and what we've been doing to make sure we change the planning reforms, we've got the infrastructure we need, as Rachel set out, about how we could change the economy so people have more money in their pocket.
How distracting has been rows over freebies and charges that he is leading a government of self-service?
No, I think we turned the page on that today, and I think...
In what way?
That was an important part of conference, and the critical argument at the heart of both the Chancellor's speech yesterday and the Prime Minister's today.
Do you expect this government to get more unpopular as time goes on.
We will not shy away from taking the tough decisions if people stick with us. The prize that is on offer is a country where everybody has the chance to live the bigger lives that they deserve.
Keir Starmer wants to lift voters' eyes back to the horizon, to the light at the end of the tunnel. But after 4 days in Liverpool, there's remarkably little joy for a newly minted government. He talks a lot about change. He now needs action. Beth Rigby, Sky News, Liverpool.
So how has Sir Keir Starmer's speech been received by the people who voted his government into office? Our political correspondent, Ali Fortescue, has been to the constituency of South West Norfolk, where the former Conservative Prime Minister Liz Truss was voted out in favour of Labour, to find out more.
In the leafy Norfolk town of Downham Market, once True Blue, now Labour, you don't have to look far to find buyer's remorse.
Must be the most unpopular Prime Minister ever.
What do you think?
I think they're rubbish.
Truss, Liz.
A Prime Minister that knows a thing or two about being unpopular was a local MP here. Liz Truss lost in July by 600 votes, turning this seat red for the first time in 80 years.
I'm sure that Liz Truss's personal brand played a part here, but this is part of Labour's wider success story, flipping tribal Tory votes, knitting together that unlikely coalition. And that is why what people think in places like this matters.
Morning, it's Breakfast with Si. This is Radio
Simon's been broadcasting on Radio West Norfolk for 2 decades. If anyone knows what people here care about, it's him.
Do you think there were reasons kind of beyond Liz Truss why people turned to Labour?
I think so. People are a little bit disheartened, aren't they? So many promises that don't happen and all of the scandals, which unfortunately maybe seem to be starting again. So I think you just want something new.
There's another story here too. Reform came a close third. Now they're targeting not just Conservatives, but Labour votes too.
I think he's good. He's got so many good policies.
Nigel Farage?
Yeah.
Because they got a lot of votes here. Why do you think that is?
Well, there's not much to choose from with the other two parties.
They sort of say one thing and then when they get in power, they do another. But the fact that this thing is Spencer's that came up, and free gifts and all that.
So far, not particularly impressed with Keir Starmer?
So far, no. I mean, it could change, you never know. But then, the moon could move out of orbit.
I am a Labour supporter, but I believe that some of the policies that they've come out with are a bit misguided.
Do you mind me asking if you voted Labour?
I did for the first time in my life, but I changed my mind this year.
Would you vote Labour next time?
We'll see.
Because today I can confirm.
He's basically saying, bear with me and things will get better. Do you believe that?
You're just asking people to hope and have blindless faith again.
Keir Starmer redrew the political map, but with a landslide built on shaky foundations, it's minds beyond the conference walls in places like this he needs to win over. Ali Fortescue, Sky News, South West Norfolk.
Relatives of a woman and young girl who died in a house in Salford have told Sky News that they were mother and her disabled daughter. Police earlier identified them as Martina Carros, aged 40, and 8-year-old Eleni Edwards, saying they were found dead inside the property on South Radford Street yesterday. Investigators say they believe there are no suspicious circumstances in what they describe as a tragic loss of life. They say they're not looking for anyone else over the incident. A man has been arrested in Oxford and is believed to be the first charged under a ban on machete-style weapons known as zombie knives. Thames Valley Police say a zombie knife was found in his home a little over 20 minutes after the ban took effect at midnight last night. The 29-year-old was also charged with affray and assault over an incident last month. More than 20 flood warnings, some severe, are in place in England tonight, including in and around Warwickshire, Oxfordshire and Bedfordshire. There was widespread flash flooding yesterday when some areas had a month's worth of rain in 24 hours. Newington in Oxfordshire saw 2 months' worth, while the Met Office has issued more yellow warnings for rain for Thursday for the North East. Now, back in 2022, the UK was among the world's biggest economies to introduce sanctions designed to hurt Russia following their invasion of Ukraine. But a Sky News investigation has revealed that luxury British cars are still making their way onto Russian soil via neighbouring Georgia. Our economics and data editor, Ed Conway, has taken a trip to the border to see what's going on.
The Caucasus mountain range in Georgia. With peaks higher than any in the Alps, this is the historic borderland between Europe and Asia. The road here snakes through the hills, up the valleys from the Georgian capital. And we've come here in search of a very particular vehicle. At first glance, there's nothing unusual about it, just a Range Rover on its way from the factory to its new owner. But this is a supply chain delivering sanctioned cars into Russia. And having spent days in Georgia looking for evidence of how these cars are passing through here, we finally ran into it. So we were on our way back from the border towards Tbilisi, the capital. And then, lo and behold, what did we run into but another car carrier carrying what looks like a brand new Range Rover. Soon enough, it was joined by a second Range Rover. Driving up, heading for the border, day gave way to dusk, and still we carried on north. As night fell, we arrived at a makeshift car park just a few hundred yards from the only crossing from Georgia into Russia, the Lars checkpoint. The Range Rovers were just part of a consignment of numerous luxury cars. Feels like it's kind of peak time now. There's one Range Rover being unloaded. Another one just came off that truck over there. There's a Lamborghini over there. So all of these cars arriving. We've spoken to one of the drivers, doesn't really want to talk on camera. He says he's just delivering these cars right now. And for the most part, they just stay here until potentially tomorrow, potentially a few days later. That's when they go across the border. The following morning, the car park had fallen quiet once again, but the cars were still there, waiting for the next leg of their journey. So check the VIN numbers, the fingerprints essentially on this car and the other Range Rover brought here overnight, and they both say the same thing. Made in Solihull in 2024, this year. In other words, 2 years after sanctions were imposed on Russia that were supposed to prevent these cars going in, here they are. And this is just one of a number of different routes taking items like this, and indeed weaponry and equipment, into Russia. It's happening in plain sight. Jaguar Land Rover told Sky News these cars were originally sold into a different country which doesn't share a border with Russia. It said JLR stopped sales of vehicles to Russia and Belarus in February 2022. It continues to adapt its compliance strategies to counter the efforts of third parties seeking to circumvent sanctions against Russia and Belarus. But here on the border, we found evidence of a well-oiled process, of people shifting cars here, then across the frontier, one sanctioned vehicle at a time. No one hides it. They may not show up in the export data, but everyone knows what's going on. Ed Conway, Sky News in Georgia.
Well, reacting to that report, the Cabinet Office Minister Pat McFadden told Sky News the government has taken note of what Ed Conway found.
It's really important that if we take a decision on sanctions, that it's properly applied. So I'm sure that the relevant parts of government that are responsible for the policing of sanctions will take that report seriously. They should. Russia's invasion of Ukraine was an appalling act of aggression. That's why these sanctions are in place, not just from us, but from other European countries too.
Well, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's newspapers and the press preview tonight, joined by the journalist and broadcaster, Jenny Kleeman, and the PR consultant, Alex Dean. Great to see both of you. Certainly among the stories we'll be discussing, this on the front page of the Daily Mirror on Keir Starmer's speech to the Labour conference. Its headline, Tough Love. Back with that and more after the break.